Evolutionary Underground Supplements, episode 16, coming your way. Today we're going to talk about 2024 dangers to liver and kidneys from oral steroids. So in this one, look, we're going to talk about liver and kidney facts. We're going to talk about bodybuilders that have illnesses that have used oral steroids and what we can learn from them. We're going to talk about what to look for in blood work in liver and kidneys when you're using these oral steroids. We're going to talk about why support supplements work and why they're mandatory. And then we're going to talk about N2BM products. We're going to talk about which N2BM products you should be using on cycle, PCT, in between cycles to help with your liver and kidneys. So it's going to be a really, really good one. So dig in and really listen closely to this. So let's start with the kidneys. And we all have relatives who have kidney issues. And especially if you have a big family, there's always someone who's got kidney issues who needs dialysis as they get older. And it's a real big pain in the ass. We're going to get into that later. But look, the kidneys are two reddish-brown, bean-shaped, blood-filtering organs. And some people are born with one kidney, or some people lose a kidney during their life. Look, and it's they're both located on the left and right in the retroperitoneal space. And in humans, they're about 4.5 inches in length. And what they do is they receive blood from the paired renal arteries, and the blood exits into the paired renal veins. So each kidney is attached to a ureter, which is a tube that carries excreted urine to the bladder. So the kidney participates in control of the volume of various body fluids. And it's going to be the way our bodies remove toxins. So just imagine it kind of like your toilet. You use the toilet, you flush it, and it goes. Those are what your kidneys are doing. They're filtrating constantly. So when we use anabolic steroids, all that strain that gets put on the kidneys from this toxic drugs, toxic hormones that are in our body, the kidneys have to excrete it. So obviously, the more steroids you use, the more under pressure it's going to be. And there's only so much it can take before the kidneys say, you know what, I can't take it anymore. I can't filter all this. And it basically, there's a backup. And this is when you get blood work done. And we're going to get into blood work later. When you get blood work done and you see your kidney numbers elevated, that means that there's an overage. So you're flushing your toilet, but your toilet over time doesn't flush as good, and it overflows, and you get some waste spilling into your bathroom. Then you get more waste spilling into your hallway, then your living room, then your kitchen, and now you have a problem. So it gets to the point where you flush the toilet and it just stops working. So that's when you need dialysis. You need to be plugged up to a machine that will do the work for you that the kidneys aren't able to do. And that's what we see with a lot of bodybuilders. The Mobster is going to get into that shortly. Now with the liver, do you want to touch on the kidneys, Mobster, and then I'll get into the liver?
Yeah, the only little extra bit of useful information here is occasionally I've seen on the forums people mistaking back pain for kidney pain. So where Steve's talking about the location in simple terms is at the behind the intestines, up underneath the lower part of your rib cage. And occasionally, of course, if you've got back pain pumps from certain PEDs and the training that you've been doing or whatever else, it can be very easy to confuse that, and especially if you're kind of stressed and worrying about it. The difference between back pain, back discomfort, muscular stress, etc., that you've done in a gym and you've strained yourself and so on and so forth with kidney pain, it's highly unlikely that you will have that for the most part. But obviously, we want to make sure that if you do have it, you recognize what it's for. So yeah, the location there. And of course, people were sometimes confused that with the liver and the kidneys, etc. So the factual information that Steve gives you is relevant and useful. Back to you, Steve.
Yeah, and I never understood the whole, oh, my kidneys hurt. How do you know it's your kidneys? A lot of times it's just pumps in the gym. Like, oh, my kidneys are hurting. And another thing too, just because you don't have what you think is kidney pain doesn't mean your kidneys aren't strained and your kidneys aren't being damaged either.
Yes.
Like, because most people out there, if you talk to your relatives who have to take dialysis, they're in their 60s and 70s and they have to be on dialysis for different reasons. Maybe they drank alcohol, maybe they ate fast food all the time. Maybe they
Yep.
only have one kidney and they ruin that kidney through poor lifestyle. Maybe it's not their fault and shit happens in life. Maybe they use anabolic steroids, whatever it could be. If you talk to them, they didn't one day wake up with, oh my God, I have kidney pain. Let me go to the
Yeah.
hospital. And
Yeah.
then they diagnose them. No, it's something over time that occurred. And it was something that they checked through their doctor and their blood work. And fortunately, in America, if they did have health insurance, they would have been getting checked on a yearly basis, and the doctor would have seen, hey, your kidney numbers are being are strained. Something is wrong here. Then they would have done further tests on the kidneys, and then that would have determined, hey, your kidneys aren't functioning
Yes.
properly. We have
Yes.
to take this next step, or basically you're going to die. Because if you don't filter out these toxins, then it's like the toilet not working. Eventually, it gets backed up, backed up, backed up, and eventually your house is completely ruined. And you know what I'm saying. So we don't want to go to that.
They were
Now,
digging the foundations up and laying down pipe, man. So
yeah,
yeah, we
by
got
then you just gotta
we
like take the whole thing down. It's over.
yeah, yeah.
All right,
Don't wait
so
till it's fucked, guys. Get it fixed. But then we're gonna give you advice in that regard as well. Thank you, Steve.
the liver now is a major metabolic organ, and it's only found in vertebrate animals. So, um, its functions is the detoxification of an organism. In our case, human beings, synthesis of proteins and biochemicals necessary for digestion and growth. And in humans, it's located in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen, below the diaphragm, and mostly shielded by the lower right rib cage. Very, very important. Metabolic roles include carb metabolization, production of hormones, conversion and storage of nutrients such as glucose and glycogen, and decomposition of red blood cells. And it also produces bile, which is an alkaline fluid containing cholesterol and bile acids, and it aids the breakdown of dietary fat. So very, very important that our liver is functioning properly. And there is such thing as liver dialysis that can be used in the short term if your liver goes bad, but there's no such thing as artificial livers, and they're just not going to work. So um, they came out with something called liver transplantation, and that was an option for complete liver failure. But luckily, the liver is very resilient and it can come back. Now, what ends up happening, and again, we go back, maybe you have friends or relatives who are alcoholics who've really screwed up their livers and have had, what's called fatty liver disease.
Mm.
And when you use oral steroids, just like with the kidneys, when you use oral steroids, many of these oral steroids out there are 17 alpha alkylated, and most of
Yes.
them are. So what that means is basically when you take them, they're making a pass through the liver and they're straining the crap out of your liver in the process. That helps them absorb better than something that isn't 17 alpha alkylated, which doesn't get absorbed well in the body. So it's going to have to get put into the bloodstream to be most effective. So we see steroids, Anadrol, Superdrol, Anavar, Turonabol, on and on and on. Winstrol. These are the most. These are the 17 alpha alkylated oral steroids that are most used. Things like Proviron, Andriol, oral Primobolan. These aren't 17 alpha alkylated, but at the same time, they don't absorb as well as these other steroids that I was just mentioning. So, if you're going to use oral anabolic steroids, it's not a big deal to use them, but if you abuse them, which a lot of people
Yes.
do,
Yes.
running them at excessive dosage, running them for long periods of time, your liver values will get worse and worse and worse. And when you come off of your steroid cycle, they're not going to go back to normal the way you want. But also, it's very, very important to use support supplements when you use oral anabolic steroids. I'm going to get into that later in the show as well. But the liver is very, very important. And you don't have to use anabolic steroids to screw up your liver. But let's say you did drink alcohol and you were taking oral steroids at the same time. Can you imagine the type of damage you would do to your liver? It would be absolutely brutal. And I've seen some really bad numbers when it comes to the liver, Mobster. Talk about that a bit, and then we'll move on to.
Yeah, I mean, look, Steve, with the great, it's kind of confusing sometimes for people because the only reason our muscles grow is because we stress them. Equally, there's a bunch of oral over-the-counter and or prescribed medication that can have issues with the body. We know this because of the inflammatory response. Literally, we want to cause an inflammatory response when we train in order to grow. But the argument about all of these things is stress. So, as Steve said, if we are abusing alcohol and over-the-counter medications, a good example of that would be Dorian Yates ended up having to have a small blood transfusion because he was using, I believe, something like ibuprofen at high doses in excess of 800 milligrams per day for a long period of time as a result of one of the, towards the end of his career, injuries, and trying to get around that. And that actually caused him more problems than the steroids was using. And of course, he's even talked about his steroid use, and it's kind of moderate when we can talk about some of the pro cycles that Steve and I have discussed. Obviously, all of these things, if you're eating crap all the time, drinking way too much regularly, even now and again, and so on and so forth, you're adding stress to the body. And that's kind of common sense. We feel invincible when we're younger. We understand the benefits of being healthy, etc. The older we get, we want to be doing that all the time, Steve. So it's just like I said, common sense with certain particular situations and whatever. The problem, of course, and the focus of this podcast would be the simple fact that if you're listening to this show, you're almost certainly a PD user. You want to be a big, muscular, strong, lean, etc. Motherfucker. And the prima facie reason for you listening to the show is to try and get good, solid advice as to how we can get better and stay healthy while using lowish to sensible doses of oral steroids. And of course, that's not to say that injectable steroids don't add some stress, because they do, but oral steroids are specifically designed in a way, methylated, as Steve said, alpha alkylated, 17 alpha alkylated, to do that first pass through the liver, and that in and of itself is what's going to cause more stress. And again, as I've said on other shows, Steve, that would be on a milligram for milligram basis. But yeah, know what's going on in your body and know specifically that these two organs are going to be the ones that are most impacted. As we have done on other shows, Steve, you could also argue, because again, we're stressing our bodies, we're trying to get big, strong, lean, and so on and so forth. It's important also to have brain health, or lung health, heart health, and so on and so forth. But the focus of today is the impact that those oral steroids will have on the liver and kidney specifically. I'll get into the second section here, Steve, and talk about a list of athletes. Now, one of the things I said to Steve in a pre-show is that some of his athletes are dead. Some of his athletes had pre-existing medical conditions, and where I know that they did, I will say so. Some of them had arguably steroid-induced issues and so on and so forth. I will start with the first one. Frank McGrath was born with one kidney, and if you see recent videos and photographs of him on Instagram, on YouTube, and so on and so forth, Steve, you'll actually see if he's got a shirt on, a little bulge under the shirt where he has a tube, and that's part of the dialysis treatment that he takes. Now, I will say, because I just literally saw this yesterday, clicked on a reel with Frank on. Frank was talking about some person, another athlete, Sam Sulek, I believe, and talking about Sam's occasional habit of eating junk food, and then laughed and said, well, I do that too. I wish I'd known about it. I could have made a video on it. And I was thinking, mate, you've got one kidney, you're on dialysis, a little bit of a treat now and again is probably fine, but I would prefer that you eat more healthy long term. You might be able to get away with things, but you're on kidney dialysis. Come on. So that was number one. Number two, Flex Wheeler. Now, Flex has had a bunch of medical problems, full stop. But he specifically, and I can't even remember what it is, Steve, a pre-existing medical issue that was incredibly rare. And even though I believe a sister came forward and helped him with a transplant, he's had amputations, he's had a bunch of other issues and so on and so forth. But one of these was the issue, for example. And of course, we know from both Frank and Flex that they've been open about their steroid use. Another one, which I wasn't aware of, Steve, perhaps I should have been, was Fouad Abiad, who does some podcasts of his own. And I didn't realize that he was on dialysis. And again, of course, on those podcasts, he'll be talking about steroid use. All these people so far, Steve, are well known for steroid use and have discussed it, etc. To a lesser degree, but well known for liver and or kidney issues, as I believe he might be dead, I might be wrong, renowned amongst other bodybuilders, Don Long. Sean Dunno Davies, who I've actually met personally, but passed away, I believe, in the last 12 to 18 months. And he was an absolute fucking freak over here in the United Kingdom back in the day. Huge arms, small waist. So it looked absolutely crazy. And unfortunately, when I met him, he'd already shrunk down, Steve, considerably, to say the least. You wouldn't have known he'd have been a professional bodybuilder. And unfortunately, one of the reasons for him passing away was related to kidney and or liver issues. Further on, for example, and Chris has actually discussed his steroid use, specifically using low amounts of steroids compared to many, being well aware of the risk factors. So, for example, the idea that Chris Bumstead would compete in the Open, he said, I would have to take more steroids. I'd have to be a lot bigger. And he has an autoimmune issue. And essentially, the stress of being on these things, literally the inflammatory stress, the more food he would need to eat, the way he would have to train, and or increasing PED use, would literally have to work out, is it worth me doing these things for me to get to the open class size and so on. And he's done many videos on how he feels and being ill and the actual medical issue that he has, and also discussed again, if I had to do that, I would need to take more steroids, I would need to eat more food, I would need to stress my body more, and every single one of those factors will cause him a lot of issues. So that he's been very open about that. To a lesser known athlete, and this was one I believe that ended up in the press, Steve, with regards to autopsies and medical analysis, etc., was an athlete called Michael Franson. I will also touch on here, Steve, and this is more the historical stuff. So we have greater access to information now than we've ever had before. And there used to be a lot of horror stories. I also make sure to mention any of the things that we're talking about today are arguably kind of rare. Okay. When we got the actual medical stuff that we will be referring to and studies that have been done, they specifically point out that these issues are rare. But again, it's coming down to how they've done the study. One of the studies, Steve, was with HIV patients, and then they sort of suggested that the study with HIV patients might transfer over to steroid using bodybuilders. That shouldn't be done. If you're not ill, if you haven't fucked yourself up, if you haven't been doing loads of drugs and you haven't been drinking a lot, arguably for most users, that you should be looking at a quote unquote healthier than the man in the street lifestyle. You're not smoking, you're not drinking, you're not doing stupid shit. You are doing one risk factor. But nevertheless, back in the day, Steve, I've seen old photographs, video clips, and obviously some doctor standing there giving you the horror story. It sounds a little bit like your mum or your dad saying, oh, you don't want to be doing that because of steroids. Yeah, but you need to understand the risk factors. They do exist. And while it's rare, they get less rare the longer you're on, the more steroids you're using, especially the more oral steroids you're using on a like-for-like basis with comparison to injectable. And things like, for example, Steve, I would say the risk factor would be higher if you're on steroids non-stop, vis-a-vis cruising and blasting and so on and so forth. And especially, we've discussed this as well with regards to professional use, the high-level pro competing, amateur competing steroid use that's required, and you are rolling the dice in terms of the potential for you to make a sufficient income, become famous, and so on and so forth, versus your PED use. So look at these people. Some of them are dead. Some of them have had pre-existing medical conditions. Some of them have literally abused steroids, and they will tell you that they've abused steroids. And some of them are fully aware that if they do abuse steroids, it could fuck them up and give them those kind of issues that we're going to discuss. Let's touch upon now, Steve, son of, and I'll just list a couple, things to look out for. And we're not talking about blood work here, just an example, Steve.
Yeah.
Jaundice, the classic one of having yellow eyes, for even being dehydrated and doing steroids, not having a healthy diet and do steroids. And then we've literally seen people back in the day, especially not recently, thank fuck, with yellow eyes caused jaundice because of the stress they were putting their body under with drugs,
I've
with alcohol.
seen back in the day, what would happen a lot of times, teenagers or people really young, they would buy the pro hormones from either the store or online, but they weren't aware that these were toxic to the liver. So they would buy them. They're like, oh, it's over the counter. How bad could it be? Well, they didn't realize these pro hormones were extremely liver toxic, in some ways more liver toxic than oral steroids, but in many ways almost as liver toxic as oral steroids, but they were still over the counter in America. They didn't finally ban these until the Pro Hormone Ban Act, which was between 5 and 10 years ago. It happened, and they got pulled off the shelves. But that was what was happening. They had yellow eyes. You can actually look at pictures. They take pictures of themselves with yellow
Yeah,
eyes.
yeah, yeah,
Hey,
yeah,
I'm a vampire. I have yellow eyes. That's so cool. No, it's not cool. You're destroying your liver as a
yeah.
teenager, and then when you get in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, now you're gonna have liver problems because
Mm.
of the damage you did. So it's very important to be aware that these oral steroids have consequences, when you use them, and that they will strain your liver one way or the other.
Absolutely, Steve. I mean, the obvious one, you don't want to be a young person with heart issues, with cirrhosis of the liver. I mean, let me just list a couple: tumors of the liver, liver cancer, and let's see if I can say this properly: peliosis, hepatitis, or hepatitis, a form of liver disease, and you're young. You are training, you're healthy, you've got six pack, you've got veins, but you didn't understand, using 200 milligrams of an oil per day for months at a time. How many times, Stephen, you and I have seen small posts, not often, thank fuck, where people are talking about 20 weeks on cycle. I'm like, I don't want to be 5 months on any cycle ever. Why are you on a 20-week cycle when you're not a pro, when you're not competing? It's just silly little things, honestly. And as you go, there are reasons why we recommend shorter cycles. You can do 2 cycles a year. You're not having a long enough off, and so on and so forth. For some of those things, and we get it. We understand the drive. We wouldn't be doing this podcast if we didn't, to grow and to be strong and to be lean and so on and so forth, and to be a freak and having people look at us. But equally, you need to understand that if you start to get some of these issues, you may have caused these problems on yourself because you didn't look after your body, because you didn't use an organ protector, etc. So these are absolutely things you need to look at. And like I said, it's slightly confusing, right? Because doctors will sometimes stand on their own little soapbox, and it certainly used to happen back in the day. And so you shouldn't use steroids because they don't actually make you grow. Well, that was bullshit. We knew it was. Equally, they'll say, "Well, I've seen people come in." Yes, mate, but they're only coming to you because they are ill. What about the thousands of them that didn't need to come to you, and so on and so forth? I mean, some of these are incredibly rare, Steve, but let's just give you a few of these. And it says rare, but only with long-term use. Black turry or light-coloured stools, dark-coloured urine. Let me just do the urine one, Steve, before we do anything else and before we go to the rest of the show. Okay, so if you're dehydrated, your pee can be way more yellow, bordering on orange than it should be. If your diet's a bit poor, the same. If you've actually used certain vitamin products and food coloring in some of those vitamin products, and I'm specifically thinking of vitamin C and some of the food coloring in certain vitamins, this will also discolor your urine. But equally, again, we sometimes neglect if we're busy at work, if we are in the gym, we're not drinking enough actual water and or fluid to stay properly dehydrated. And we're training like crazy motherfuckers, and we're taking a lot of protein and so on and so forth. You occasionally hear the horror stories about excessive protein use, and it's arguable because you should excrete it. Um, Again, pre-existing medical issues, which are pretty much when every single case of the quote-unquote excessive proteins come up, is nearly always that the person had a pre-existing medical issue. But again, excessive protein not used, excreted by the body, will discolor urine. Now, again, these are horror stories from back in the day, Steve. We get people that occasionally, and thank God I've never had it, training so goddamn fucking hard or stressing their body so goddamn hard. And we've seen nosebleeds in strongman and in powerlifting, but having blood in your urine. Now, that can sometimes be because you're a fighter, MMA, boxer, etc., but also because you are, again, you're squatting with 1,000 pounds, you're benching 600-700 pounds, you're doing crazy, fucked up shit that stresses the body. But if you're not doing that kind of stuff and you've got what appears to be a redness or brownness to your urine, get your ass to the doctor. Get your ass to the doctor. Make sure that it's not an issue. Make sure that maybe it's just a temporary thing because you did that crazy thing with the weights at some event at the weekend or whatever else. Could even be that you've had a minor accident and you don't understand what's going on. We're all about your health on this show, so we're all about the things you can do to prevent it. So if you want, Steve, you want to touch on that before we move on to the importance of blood work and understanding it, and I'll bring in some comments on the blood work as well.
Yeah, we touched on kidney dialysis earlier, and kidney dialysis, if you abuse these oral steroids and you start doing it when you're in your 20s and you do it in your 30s and your 40s and your 50s, there's a good chance by the time you're in your 60s or 70s, you're going to need kidney dialysis. Now, of course, there's people that need kidney dialysis who've never touched steroids before.
Yes. Yes.
I know people, I have family members that never touch anabolic steroids and they need kidney dialysis. But here's the thing, it's going to increase, it's going to make it quicker in your life. So kidney dialysis is not a fun experience. And
No.
so what they're going to have to,
Steve, it's 4 days a week minimum, and typically 3 to 4 days a week minimum. And I believe, and I'm thinking specifically of a very famous American cyclist, at least 3 to 4 hours every single, basically a morning or an afternoon, 3 to 4 times a week. And it is not a fun experience by any stretch.
so what they have to do, they have to basically plug you up and they have to run your blood through basically an artificial kidney machine. And that artificial kidney machine does what your kidney is supposed to do. So it filters out the crap out of your blood, then puts it back into your body. So yes, it takes a long time. Now you can do it
Yeah.
from home or you can go in to do it. I think if you do it from home, it's, not I think it's probably going to be a hell of a lot more expensive, because you
I
have to
imagine.
hire your
Yeah.
own nurse
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
come and she
Yeah.
has to plug you up. So basically, you have to just sit on your ass with this thing hooked up to you. Can you imagine? I mean, a lot of people just turn it down. They're like, fuck it, I'm not going to even do it. And then what ends up happening, they die. It takes you about a
Yes.
week or two to die because the toxicity gets too great in your body and you get
Mm.
sent to hospice and that's it. Party is over. So obviously, it's not something you want to do. So keep that in mind. We're not saying this to scare you. We're just telling you the facts. And these are
Yes.
the facts. Mobster just named a bunch of bodybuilders that have had this issue.
That
And the
was a real
dialysis,
short list, Steve. I could easily have gone on and found another half a dozen. And that literally took me 5 minutes to find that list. Five.
all because you didn't take care of your kidneys. You didn't do what was needed to take care of your kidneys and you abused your kidneys when it wasn't necessarily a priority and it wasn't necessarily needed. So this is something just to think about. Going forward when you're this is the thing about it. And it's important to get blood work done because what happens is, as Mobster said earlier, in bodybuilding, we've looked at having high kidney numbers and high liver numbers as quote unquote normal. Okay. And that
Mm.
is true, but that doesn't mean it's a good thing. Just because something is normal in the bodybuilding world doesn't mean it's a good thing. So I'll bring up a couple little studies here. One of the studies on kidney disease said researchers proposed that extreme increase in muscle mass required the kidneys to increase the filtration rate, placing harmful levels of stress on these organs. It's also likely that steroids have direct toxic effect on the kidneys. Boom. So if you're a big muscular guy and you're holding a lot of muscle on your frame, as Mobster and I both are,
Yeah.
it's going to in itself stress our kidneys. And yes, when I get blood work done, in a lot of cases, my blood work show my kidneys are elevated. That's just how it is because we're holding so much muscle on our frame. We're breaking down muscle, repairing muscle constantly. So that
Yep.
obviously puts some pressure on the kidneys. But like the article said, it's not just the muscle mass, it's also the additional stress that the steroids are putting on our body. Another one study that came out said anabolic steroid use increases not just heart attack risk. We're not talking about heart on this one, but it causes liver damage. And that's the key term, is damage. And they did a study on this where they took a look at different markers, obviously with cholesterol, which having to do with your heart, but with the liver, they said that it says here, we found grade 3 and grade 4 liver toxicity in some men, which means a very significant risk of liver failure. And these were men that were on anabolic steroids. So this was in this example, they did 12 weeks of oxandrolone, which is Anavar. And remember I said at the beginning, Anavar is a 17 alpha alkylated steroid, but it's actually not as bad on your liver as some of the others. Imagine
Yes.
if you were using Superdrol or Anabrol or
Mm.
Halo, or
Mm.
Winstrol, some of these other oral steroids that were even more harsh. They used a mild example here. It wasn't a study trying
Well,
to
that's
scare
that's
you.
probably arguably Steve the mildest. What about check drops, for example?
Oh yeah.
As Steve said, and especially, I mean, some of the drugs and I said this is on another show. In the case of Halo and check drops, for example, when I first looked at them, I couldn't find a single guru, expert, call it what you will, that was recommending in one of the drugs case no longer than 4 weeks on, and in the other drug case, specifically check drops, no more than 2 weeks. And these were people that were trying to use it for anabolic purposes. In the case of Anavar's arguably, and this is debatable, of course, because I see back and forth, when it's in its dose dependent, again, arguably the least stressful oral steroid you can take. Maybe Turinabol up there too, Steve. But again,
Yeah,
it's dose dependent, how long you're on, and so on. Back to you.
let me finish the study so we don't confuse people. And then here's another example. This was another anabolic steroid study, and this was done over the course of 2 years and 2.5 years. And they found in the end that there was a link between early kidney damage and the direct use of anabolic androgenic steroids. And this was anabolic androgenic steroids as a whole. They used both orals and injectables. So this hit their kidneys and this hit their liver. But specifically, this study talks about their liver damage over an extended period of time. This wasn't just like a 10-week cycle, 12-week cycle. This was where they followed these guys for 2-3 years, Mobster.
Yeah.
So we know the liver, obviously, it's common sense. Even the biggest meathead out there who denies science, who's an anti-vaxxer, all this stuff, they'll even admit, yeah, anabolic steroids fuck my liver. But in these cases, we're seeing the studies that show long-term and short-term use of anabolic steroids. If you abuse them, the more you abuse them, the more kidney damage comes up. So this is the evidence. Now, what should we look for in blood work? Let's talk about the different numbers so you understand. So the ones that we're going to specifically target is going to be 6 of them that I'm going to talk about. 5 of them, excuse me. So you have BUN, which is blood urea nitrogen. And this one is measured in this example in milligrams per deciliter. And I'm going by the American numbers here. So obviously in Europe, you might be a little different. But the numbers should be 6 to 20. And the bottom line is it's very common in bodybuilders. I've looked at a lot of blood work for the blood urea nitrogen to be over 20 in the mid 20s, high 20s, 30s even. And that's something that's going to cause your kidneys to be strained. Creatinine. This one, milligrams per deciliter, should be somewhere between 0.76 and 1.27. Again, with this one, I usually see in bodybuilders or athletes, bodybuilders who use anabolic steroids elevated in the mid 1.5s, in the high 1.5s, even in the 2s. Very, very common. And Mobster always talks about on the forum taking creatine supplements. And creatine supplements can affect that number in a small way, but it doesn't really send it to these kinds of numbers. So this is something to watch out for. You have the blood urine nitrogen / creatinine ratio. This should be somewhere between 9 and 20. This is a very important number. And this this ratio is a very key indicator of kidney health. And it's calculated by dividing blood urine nitrogen number by the creatinine number. So a normal ratio for healthy people, you're looking at 10 to 1 versus 20 to 1. So that's where that's the normal number with that. So as I said, somewhere between 9 and 20. I've seen this usually with bodybuilders higher. I've seen it in the 20s, well into the 20s. And this is proof that your kidneys are being strained. Now, is it normal in bodybuilding? As I said earlier, yes. But is it good? No. Does that make sense? So it's not healthy. Okay. Just like it's normal for cholesterol numbers to be strained with people who use steroids, but it's not a healthy thing. So we've normalized it over the past 20 to 30 years to the point where, hey, I just ignored a number, but yeah, you're doing damage to your kidneys. And the more you do damage to your kidneys, as the studies I told you guys point, the more you do damage, the more you're going to end up like the list of people Mobster mentioned. And that's going to be, you're going to be hooked up to a machine for 3 to 4 hours several times a week because the machine has to do the work that your kidneys can't anymore. Touch on that a bit, Mobster, and I got to get to the liver numbers. Very important.
So super important to understand this, guys. I mean, as Steve said, it is a small impact in terms of using creatine, but the breakdown of creatine in your body, what's not been utilized by your body will turn into creatinine as a byproduct. Creatinine can give a false value in that particular regards. So can high protein use over and above what your body actually requires to build and repair muscle tissue, and so on and so forth. So a solid piece of advice is to stop the creatine use if you are using it, training for a few days, make sure you're hydrated. And arguably, Steve, even, and I've had this actual advice given to me when I know that I've got a blood test coming up, not to fast from the night before, so that, you know, by the time you're having a blood test, you're looking at 12, 13, 14 hours. What you're looking for here, guys, is you must again understand that high protein use, training your asses off, doing all the things that we do, and or oral, and then obviously injectable steroids will affect the numbers. Equally, stopping training, fasting, and knocking the creatine on the head for 4 or 5 days will give a much truer picture. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for an accurate picture. The other issue is, and again, like Steve said about the normalization. So now, because I train all the time, because I use high protein all the time, therefore I'm going to have these numbers come up. That's why I should ignore them. Well, no, because if again you're fasting and dieting and hydrating and not taking creatine for a few days and then get the blood test and the numbers are high, there might be an issue. And that's precisely why you're having the blood test.
Yeah.
For that
So
and for other reasons.
if you go into the blood work fasted and you're really dehydrated, then there's a good, this will
Yeah,
spike the
exactly.
number
So
as well.
hydrated, but
But let me
hydrate but
explain.
fast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me explain why. Unless you want to explain why, Mobster. You want to explain why
No,
that is?
I mean, you can explain why in that
Yeah, let me
specific
explain. Yeah.
example, Steve. Yeah.
So okay. So blood urine nitrogen measures the amount of urine nitrogen in your blood. So urine nitrogen is the waste product that your kidneys remove from your blood. So if the number is high, it could be a sign that the kidneys aren't working well. But also, if you go into that without drinking very much because you're told to fast going into it, that can strain the number. We see this a lot with bodybuilders and athletes because if you had a workout the day before and you're sweating and stuff, you didn't hydrate
Yes.
enough.
Yes.
Now, let me explain creatinine as well. So that measures the creatinine in your blood to assess how well your kidneys are filtering it. And again, creatinine is a waste product of creatine, as Mobster mentioned, which is a
Yes.
chemical that your body produces to give energy to the muscles. So it's not just supplemented; it's actually a
Oh,
way.
yeah, pre-existing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's already in your body. So, but here's the thing: we can cut the bullshit. Okay, we can cut the bullshit, and we can cut the anti-science bullshit out there. A lot of you guys like to say by simply going. The blood work is one thing, but there's advanced kidney tests that can be done through your doctor. So if these
Yes.
numbers are elevated and you're worried, then you can cut to the chase and go get the proper kidney tests that will actually cut to the chase. And you can't give the excuse was, oh, I was dehydrated, doctor. He told me to
Yeah, I
fast.
trained or I used creatine.
Yeah,
No,
you
no,
can't use
you
any
get a
of
much
that
better picture.
shit.
Yeah.
It's not gonna
Yeah.
it's gonna
Yeah.
cut to the chase. So that's the simplest way to explain it. So if you get to that point where your kidneys are a problem, that's how the doctor will finally diagnose you. But like, yeah, you have kidney disease, not through fucking blood work. Okay,
No,
blood work
exactly. I
is
was also thinking,
a
Steve,
snapshot
Steve,
in
yeah, sorry, Steve said
blood.
about the other test, which I'll agree with, but also, again, guys, if you stop training and you've got issues for weeks, if you've had a holiday and you've got issues, if you know that you're hydrated, you've got issues, and so on and so forth. So, you know, the
Yeah.
snapshot, as Steve just said, is a good indicator. But again, just don't put your head in the sand because you had one bad test. You've got to know that you've had multiple tests, and as Steve said, advanced tests. And again, those red flags, those numbers that they come up, are an indicator for the doctor that's
So then
doing the test. Yeah.
we got to get to the liver, yeah. So people can keep track of this. So the AST and ALT are the two things you want to look for with liver. And AST stands for aspartate aminotransferase, and it's a blood test measures the level of the enzyme AST in the blood. So that's found. AST is found in liver, heart, muscles, other organs, and helps the body break down amino acids. So when the cells containing AST are damaged, they release the enzyme into the blood. So when you have that from using these oral steroids, that's going to cause the AST to go up. So you'll notice your AST numbers go up. Now, let me explain ALT. ALT is measuring the ALT in your blood, very, very similar. It's an enzyme that mainly found in the liver specifically. So AST is a combination of organs. ALT is specifically liver. So when liver cells are damaged, they release ALT in the bloodstream. So what should you look for in the blood work? Now, international units per liter should be somewhere between 0 and 40 or 44, okay, on both AST and ALT. So in a steroid user, a lot of times what we see, or an alcoholic, we'll see the AST and ALT elevated well beyond that. They'll be elevated in the 80s, 90s, 100s, 200s even. Very, very high. And this is a red flag that your liver is under a lot of pressure and you could end up with major liver issues. But the liver is very resilient. So you want to make sure with this one, you keep that in mind. Liver is very resilient. So when you come off, you should stick the oral steroids, you should run your liver support, and you should also make sure you don't abuse them for too long of a time. And your liver, when you come off cycle, should get back to normal pretty quick. But we've seen, kidney numbers stay elevated nonstop because of the high protein diet, as Mobster said, the excess of muscle mass, the constant breaking down, repairing a muscle, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at your blood work. But that's what you want to look for in your blood work. And again, we can get more advanced liver tests once this, but really it's more reliable when it comes to the blood work because the AST and LT, they're there. There's no, it's not like the kidneys where it could be an imbalance, you didn't drink enough, or it could be like an imbalance of something going on that can throw that number off temporarily or permanently. With this, it's more of an accurate number. So I would keep really close eye on that. And if those numbers are elevated, you've got some issues. So you want to basically keep an eye on that. All right. So why don't we get into support supplements and why they're mandatory, Mobster? And let's kind of go over some of the ingredients in N2 Guard. So I'll start with the obvious one, and that is Tutka. And a lot of people, believe it or not, I've talked to them about Tutka, both on the forums and in person. They've like, oh, I've never heard of Tutka. Some of my clients, I've never heard of Tutka. I'm like, well, you should, because Tutka is considered the #1 supplement out there for your organ health. And Tutka is one of the 44 ingredients in N2Guard that makes it such a great product. So Tutka helps with your kidneys, your heart, your liver, your brain, but specifically kidneys and liver for this podcast. And it's a must addition. N2Guard, the original N2Guard actually didn't have Tutka, but they added it to the formula about, I'd say 5 to 10 years ago, they added Tutka. And it's a must use. Like you should never use a support supplement that doesn't contain Tutka, because that means either they don't know what they're doing, or it means number 2, they don't care about their formula. So it's a must use for your liver and kidneys. Mobster?
Yeah, I mean, Steve, I mean, the list of ingredients goes on and on. I mean, I'm just going to touch upon some of the benefits of other ingredients, but obviously the focus of this show is the liver and the kidney. For example, thiamine, 25 milligrams per serving, great for vision, organs, which we're of course talking about today, and the nervous system. Folate, 1,000 micrograms, great when it comes to having healthy cells in the body. Again, that's what your body's processing when we're talking about the liver and kidneys again. Another one, which is an essential electrolyte, and again, this what I touched upon dehydration earlier on, Steve, and of course sweating this stuff out and coming from whether the diet is balanced or not, which is not always, especially if you're competing or you're an athlete with specific requirements, which would be magnesium at 50 milligrams. So yeah, that's, as I said, Steve, look at the stuff that's specifically good for the liver and the kidneys down here. Let me give you an example again. Let me just scroll down here, Steve, because there's a really long list of ingredients, as you say.
So next one, milk thistle. I'll jump in here. Milk thistle extract. And this is the one that we used to use back in the day, Mobster, in the 2000s and 2010s. This was the most popular option for the liver. It was a great option. And it is the most used bodybuilding supplement for guys who use anabolic steroids really in the past 25 years. But here's the thing, it's not as good as Tutka and it doesn't work by itself. So it's important to use different liver and kidney supplements together to get the best synergy. And that's what N2Guard, this product by N2BM, has. They have these excellent products. Another one, great one for the liver, is Pricklive. And Pricklive makes it easier to move oxygen throughout the body and boost the liver. So this is one of the best liver support supplements as well, is the Pricklive. So I highly recommend N2Guard for that reason, because it already contains these excellent ingredients that are in N2Guard. Mobster?
Let me give, let me give you one that I've actually discussed this multiple times, Steve. And this was a huge one, probably about 20 years ago. In fact, arguably, Steve, it was the only one that we were really talking about in terms of liver protection 20 years ago. And that was milk thistle, and specifically milk thistle seed extracts. In this particular example, 300 milligrams. And arguably, Steve, I'd put that right up there with the one that you've already mentioned. And certainly was 20 years ago kind of the only choice. But yes, it still has an effect. It is still absolutely useful. And of course, it's still included in the body, Steve, sorry, in this product as a benefit for liver function. Number one for many, many years, but I think I'd probably say number one, number two with one of the ingredients you've already mentioned. Give them another one to think about.
Yeah, and there's so many different ones in here, parsley leaf, and this is one you wouldn't think, but this is a great diuretic and it helps with the kidney health. Remember how we talked about the kidneys, the way they flush, and it will gently help flush the kidneys of waste material. So it's another great option when it comes to your kidney health. And these different ingredients are really really good when it comes to all of this. And we really like this formula. 44 different ingredients that are included in N2Guard. And all of them, there's about 6 or 7 of them that are good for the liver, and there's
Yeah.
about 5 or 6 of them that are really, really good for the kidneys specifically. And another one is turmeric, and we know turmeric that's used some, in Asian dishes and stuff. It's known as a spice, but it actually has a big benefits when it comes to liver health, and they included it as well. It's got antioxidant properties. It's also really, really good for the liver to clear out your liver. And then the vitamins, Momster touched on a couple of them, but the vitamin A, the vitamin C, the vitamins are really good for your kidneys overall. Remember, we're talking about helping your kidneys filter. And N2 Guard has all your vitamins covered: vitamin A, vitamin B6, vitamin B12, vitamin C, vitamin D. I go down to the list. All of them are included. Folate is another one that's very, very important as well for the kidneys. So these all are really, really good when it comes to your kidney health. Mobster, give us a couple more.
Yeah, don't forget, guys, some of the stuff that we're talking about is specifically going to make the liver and or kidneys healthier, but also it's a question of some of the lipids profiles and indicators that are passing through the body, being filtered by the liver and the kidneys, that you're making those things healthy too. So, for example, Steve, polycancinol, 5 milligrams. Another one would be thiamine, 25 milligrams. And if I make this correct, I believe this might be a vitamin again, Steve, pantothenic acid, 25 milligrams. And again, all of these things are not just going to improve your lipid profiles, which means obviously the products, lipids, etc., are being filtered and processed by your liver and your kidneys, but also the health of the organ itself. In other words, you're stressing your body by training, by doing the things that we do in the gym, by using PEDs, you need to improve the organ health itself. And there are a bunch of other ingredients, Steve, that are specific just for organ health. As you say, the folate already healthy cells in the body. Nervous system cells, bones and teeth from calcium, 14 milligrams. Thyroid health. So just iodine, 100 micrograms. If everything else is working properly, if everything else is healthy, then it's one of us. What I've used the phrase, Steve, homeostasis. You want everything in your body working absolutely the best it possibly can. It's easy for this show to focus specifically on the liver and the kidneys, but we are fully aware, of course, of the benefits of this particular product on all of our organs and all of our lipids and on the diet. And for example, Steve, I mentioned dandelion root specifically before, because we talked about being dehydrated. Equally, this one's a natural diuretic. Certain medications that we occasionally use, and I'm thinking specifically of growth hormone, that can cause you to hold water. I just watched a show earlier on before this podcast, Steve, where they were talking about when to stop PEDs, including growth hormone, so that you're not inflamed, you're not holding water before a show. And again, the anti-inflammatory thing that the body does that, it's holding on to the water. If it's holding on to water, it's not processing it, and so on. It just makes common sense, Steve. Again, vitamin B6, we even did a show recently on prolactin, and the higher dose of vitamin B6 is actually useful for that. It also boosts your immune health. And look at, again, one of the studies that we referred to earlier on was talking about HIV patients. And so obviously they've got a massively suppressed immune system. I talked about autoimmune disease when I was referring to Chris Bumstead. So you've got to understand that while we're specifically focusing on liver and kidneys today, it's the complete organ health, all of your body working properly, optimally. And of course, if it's doing that, Steve, if it's keeping your liver and your kidneys healthy, it means you can grow better. It means you'll get a better response from your cycle. That makes sense to me, Steve. As an example, funny enough, and I'm going to mention vitamin B12, which is an incredible vitamin, 1,000 micrograms. And I'll read this. One of the glaring needs for many who struggle with fatigue system. Again, guys, you are training your asses off. You are stressing your body. You're using PEDs. Sometimes we'll get people say, oh, I'm on cycle, and I'm tired. And they'll go, well, you're kind of meant to be. You're meant to be tired because you're meant to be training your ass off. And you're meant to be doing loads more cardio, and you're meant to be on a restricted diet. So being tired is not unusual. On the other hand, if you're not crazy on the cardio and your diet is fine and sufficient and you're not cutting back, etc., is it because you're training or is it because your body's stressed? So anything that's stressing your body, again, in this example, might require vitamin B12, 100,000 micrograms. You might need that just to stop the signs of fatigue, but also maybe then, and I think there's something else we should have said on the blood work, Steve. How many times has Steve said pre-cycle, during a cycle, and post-cycle blood work is super, super important. And they're indicators of where you started from, where you are, and where you are afterwards. That's the reasons why we recommend the before, the during, and the after. We want to know if you've recovered, for example, your testosterone levels, but also if any of the negative blood markers have come back to normal because you've come off cycle, and specifically an oral steroid cycle. It makes sense again in that particular regard. That's the reason why we talk about these things. And I've also, just to sound a tiny bit preachy, Steve, and I've seen other shows say exactly the same thing. And just yesterday, if you can afford the steroid stack, if you can afford the diet, please make sure you can also afford the blood test. It's super important. They're not crazy expensive, and you can come onto the forums for advice on that particular regard, Steve. Any more thoughts on the ingredients before we move on again?
Yeah, and like I said, 44 different ingredients, they all work in synergy. It's very, very important to run a support supplement when you're on anabolic steroids, when you're in PCT, when you come off. This will help your kidneys and your liver and everything else work good. And it's very, very important. It's an unforced error not to do it. And as you said, Mobster, if you can afford the steroids, you can afford the blood work, but you can also afford the support supplements. And they're
Yes.
not that expensive. The investment you're making in your body will pay off. Can you imagine the time wasted having to go get dialysis, the money you're going to lose? That could be the 3-4 hours you could be working or building a business or being educated,
Let
building a
me use an
skill,
analogy
right?
that Steve. Let me use an analogy, Steve, just as a piece of a finisher on this particular subject. And Steve's touched upon this on other shows. Sometimes we take more care of our cars than we do of our bodies. So listen, guys, you wouldn't just gas it up and put air in the tires if you need to change your oil. You need to make sure that you do these things as well. Make sure you are looking after yourself, and you'll get better long-term results. Let's move on to talking about need to build muscles, Steve. I'll start very quickly. Right, this organization, this company was put together originally by people that were high-end athletes that really wanted to perform above and beyond, and they wanted supplements, including N2 Guard, that were going to enable them to do that. I've talked about how difficult it was then, and even to a lesser degree now, Steve, now that the formula is kind of there, how hard it was to get the right combination of ingredients put together by the formulators that do these things for the industries, how difficult it is sometimes just to have because some of these ingredients are seasonal, just to have sufficient levels of these ingredients available at that time in order for you to go out and get a batch of this product made. It's incredibly difficult. I was occasionally see people, and I've seen this for myself, they've got 2 or 3 products that I think are absolutely fucking outstanding. And N2 Guard is one, their testosterone boost is another. And when it comes back, please God, their joint product was probably the best I've ever used. And again, it's because the ingredients were expensive, high dosed, properly dosed, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, to me, it is an athlete's company, Steve, not looking to make thousands of dollars, but looking to produce the best possible products they can. What do you think on that before we finish?
Yeah, and this formula, it's been constantly updated over time. And they originally they had the formula, it was a good base. They improved it over time. As I said, they added Tutka in the last 5 to 10 years. All the new
Yep.
bottles of N2 Guard now contain Tutka, very, very important ingredient. They have ingredients. They also, the synergy that was put
Yes.
together with a purpose. They have ingredients that help you absorb. A lot of naysayers on supplements will say, Well, if you take all these supplements, it's not going to help because they can't absorb in the body. N2 Guard will, because N2 Guard, the ingredients are put together with the correct synergy, and they have the addition of piperine, which is black pepper extract. And that ingredient will help the body actually absorb all these ingredients. So it's actually going to be useful. And these other
Yes.
supplements out there, compare these other support supplements out there that are half the price, but they only have like 7 or 8 ingredients and they're low dosage.
Yeah, even worse, man. Wait. I mean, let me give you one example. I've seen arguments made for, oh, you need a higher dosage milligram of that particular product. That's single specific ingredient, motherfucker. What about the other 43 ingredients? And as Steve said, I touched on it with the formulation, the synergy. That was incredibly hard for this and one of the other products to get that right combination together where every single ingredient is not cancelling the other ingredient or is as close to an effective dose on its own as well as being with other things. So, for example, someone argues, oh, should be 1,000 milligrams of that. That's the okay, but we've got 600 milligrams of this other ingredient that does a very similar job, 300 milligrams of another ingredient that does a very similar job, and a high dose of the ingredient that you're talking about. Might not be 1,000 milligrams, but the combined total of the three things together, 1,500 milligrams, and every single ingredient that we've just talked about is having the effect that you're discussing. It's the synergy, as Steve says, and the formulation that's incredibly hard. Some of the ingredients, like I said already, Steve, are seasonal. You can't get them year round. There are other companies arguing for those products. So you have to make sure that those products are available for you. It can be very difficult for a couple of these ingredients. They're only grown at a couple of places in the world. And then you need the specific part of the plant. You want the higher grade quality of the ingredient, not the lower grade. You want standardized extracts. One of the competitors, and I use that word incredibly loosely, Steve, was piss poor. That none of the dosages were anything like useful. There was no synergistic effect that we could see, and arguably the value of the product was. I think I found the dollar equivalent for like $4 product, and it was being held up as comparable. It was a joke, Steve. It was good for your nan, someone who's got maybe a bad diet. That was about it. Not for steroid users, not for hard training athletes. It
So
was just absolutely horrendous. Yeah, go on.
So N2 Guard needs to be taken on cycle 7 caps a day. That's the serving size. So if you're running a more mild cycle, you can go 3 or 4 caps a day just to save a little money. If you're running a more harsh cycle, you can go higher, 9 or 10 caps a day. But 7 caps is the average serving size, and each bottle will last you a month if you take 7 a day. So it's going to be a huge addition. Another point, and very important, is you should dose the N2 Guard at least an hour and a half away from the oral steroids. So if you take your oral steroids at 9 a.m., for example, you want to take the N2 Guard at least later than 10:30 or 11 a.m. This way, it doesn't interfere with the oral steroid,
Yeah.
good or bad. So that's another tip. So it's as simple as that. Make sure you get your blood work done. Make sure you're taking your N2 Guard, and this will extend your life and keep your kidneys and liver healthy. Mobster, take us to the
Yeah.
disclaimer.
If you've got any questions about N2 Guard, any questions about ingredients, any questions about blood work, and you're understanding the blood work, seeing if you've got any particular issues, please come onto the forums. Definitely post in the comments below because we're always interested to see what you think. And that's it, Steve. You've just got to look after your bodies, and that's what we're all about on this show. It's what we're all about on the forums. We want you to have long-term health. We want you to keep being able to train healthily, dose PEDs in a sensible fashion, and get you the best results that you possibly can. Of course, and at the end of the day, no motherfucker wants to die because of kidney liver issues because they did ridiculous amounts of orals just for a 20-inch bicep. We don't want that for you. I'm sure you don't want it really. So make sure you follow our advice in that particular regard. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.